Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, especially since many of you are here on your spring break. I know the University of Miami students that I'm looking at were just released from classes for spring break, so it's really happy to see you. The first order of today, well, first of all, everything you're doing in this room, what we're going to talk about in this room is something that you can take away and start at your universities. And having watched this and talked to these people, I'm thinking UM might be the first place we should start. I'd like to congratulate the commitments, and if you don't mind, we'd like to call you to the stage so that you can be awarded your certificate. So if Andrew Milstead will step up. And while you stand for a minute, you can appreciate Andrew. I wore this pin especially for Andrew. Andrew was responding to the challenge that many of you understand, and he can explain it to you in more detail after. But essentially, the concern that we have for the number of crops that are pollinated by bees and the decline in the bee population. So Andrew has an idea of how to restore pollinators in Birmingham. And over the course of the year, he's going to create 6 top bar beehives, which are going to give bees greater freedom. He's going to work with local farmers, and he's going to install these in organic farms and gardens. And going forward, he hopes to sell honey and other byproducts from the hives to prove that sustainable and chemical-free apiaries are not just good for the environment, but good for business too. So congratulations to Andrew. Our second global commitment that I'm extremely happy to introduce, if Ngone and Mohammed would like to come up. Yes, you should clap for them. They're on their way. So, according to a report, 2014 report on rural livelihoods by the Zimbabwe Vulnerability Assessment Committee, the sale of vegetables in Zimbabwe makes up approximately 9% of a rural household's cash income. Based on this, what Ngone and Mohammed and Jordan, who's not here today but is part of their commitment, have committed to bring an innovative tiered gardening system to Royal Zimbabwean farmers that will make efficient use of limited land and water and create a viable way for families to grow vegetables. It's designed kind of like a bunk bed. You can kind of imagine that. They're going to stack 3 vegetable beds on top of each other, tripling the vegetable output per square foot. And starting this spring, farmers will undergo training on bed maintenance, and the team hopes to offer a simple means to improve the health and stability of rural Zimbabwean families and the resilience of the community as a whole. So let's give them another round of applause. Okay, so now I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our panel to you, and as I call your name, if the panelists wouldn't mind coming up the cliff of the stairs and taking a seat everywhere but here. The first panelist I'm going to introduce to you is Roger Horn, and I'm so excited that these people are here. This is like better than rock stars. Roger is the Director of Community Health Initiatives for Urban Greenworks right here in Miami. And he is really engaged in a form of, I would say, agricultural empowerment. And we're going to hear more about that next. Is Meg Daly. And those of you in the School of Architecture know Meg because Meg is the founder of the Underline. And for those of you that are new to Miami, the Underline is this greenway that's going to go under our metro rail system, and Meg has a 10-mile segment of it that she's pioneered this project, and we'll hear more about that from her. And then Karen Washington, who has been called the Queen of Urban Gardens. I think of her as the inventor of it because she made them famous in New York City, which people said it couldn't be done. And she is the co-founder of Black Urban Growers. And then Jaime Lerner, who some of you may have heard in the plenary section. Jaime's been to the University of Miami School of Architecture. We have admired his work for years. He's an architect who has really transformed the city. And many of the things that we are going to talk about today are ideas that Jaime's put out there a few decades ago. So join me in welcoming our panel. And you know the drill. I think you've been to these before. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have a little discussion among the panel. You could be thinking of your brilliant questions. We'll call on you for some questions, and then we'll have some table discussions. The panelists and I will roam around the room and listen in on your conversations. We'll have a report back, and then we'll conclude the session, okay? So to start this off, I think that one of the things that would be really interesting for the students to know, because you are all incredibly successful and renowned. You've been written up in the New York Times. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you, and then what were some of the biggest obstacles or challenges that you thought might have brought you to a halt and you kept going anyway? So if you don't mind, we'll start with you, Roger.
Well, being that we're the Clinton Global Initiative, first of all, thank you for having me. When I was in grad school, or actually undergrad, I got a version of the Clinton's Universal Healthcare Insurance Plan, and the act that they were going to implement at the time when Mr. Clinton was in office. And it was that kind of got me away from medicine and more towards the health administration, public health aspect of the field, and got my love for it there. So that's pretty much where everything came from. When
So
I came,
that inspired you?
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. I was an administrator when I was here in Florida, and a couple of years ago I gave it up, about 7 years ago, and I decided to get back into the public health aspect of things because I was very disgruntled with the private aspect of healthcare, and I didn't see it having an impact in the lives and in the health of communities and people that they were serving. So I got back more into public health and the aspects of gardening and environment and taking care of all of those aspects here in South Florida.
Okay. And then what was an obstacle that might have kept you from doing this, or your biggest failure?
Well,
Have you had any failures?
Initially, my biggest failure was giving up a completely entire career that I went to grad school and all of that for
Right.
to get back into public health. And then after I came over the initial fear, it was just now reinsert myself back into a completely new field. There's several obstacles in terms of what I do, but the initial impact is just getting over the fear and jumping into something completely new and completely 180 from what you
thought you were going to do.
life.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would be a frightening prospect. Meg, what about you? I think it works all by itself. Did you try it?
Hello. You can tell I'm a little challenged with technology. The question is...
Your inspiration,
inspiration.
And then the biggest problem or challenge.
Well, the inspiration for the idea, I'm working on a 10-mile linear park and urban trail below Metro Rail, which is our above-ground transit. And the inspiration really came by accident. I had a bike accident, and I broke both of my elbows, and so I couldn't drive for 3 months. And in Miami, that's really hard to do. But I had to get to physical therapy right down US 1, this is big street out front of the university. So towards the end of my healing, I took the train from UM down to Coconut Grove, and I walked underneath the train tracks. That was July. And usually July in Miami is sort of unbearable to do much of anything. But because of the shade, I was like, wow, it's pretty comfortable here. And the second thing I noticed is there was a lot of land. This is a 100-foot right-of-way, which is only used for the columns that support transit. And then the third thing I thought was, I'm the only one here. And since I've been to the High Line, who's been to the High Line? Okay, good. That was my inspiration. I've been to the High Line, and I walked it in every season, and it's like always a wow. So I thought, oh, this should be Miami's High Line. That'll be easy. Shows how naive I was. And the challenges, I have to say that we've moved really quickly. I think that that's one of the surprises of this initiative. We incorporated just a year ago, January of 2014. The challenges were not knowing anything about government. I've never been to a commission meeting in my life before last spring. And so I report to the county and 3 municipalities. That's a lot of commissioners and a lot of mayors. The second challenge is probably funding. Maybe I should put funding first and politicians later. And then the third is getting the attention of the public, which is very hard to do with so much noise. And I can address that later.
Okay. That's Karen?
So what inspired me the most in the work that I have been doing for the past 28 years is that when I grew up in New York City, but when I moved to the Bronx back in 1985, can you imagine that New York City had over 15,000 vacant lots, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color. And those that could move left. We called it white flight. And those that could not move had to stay. And so those people that remained turned those empty lots into community gardens. The biggest challenge is, of course, if you live in an urban area, how do you balance growing food and housing? And that's a big, big challenge that we have even today. So by really inspiring people to not only grow food, but to get involved in the politics behind growing food, because I think when you live in a city, all of a sudden you had to deal with complacency because of the fact that so many people were so used to growing food that they never realized that growing food in a municipality is political. And so training people, first of all, newly immigrants, and people who have been there for such a long time, the one-on-one community organizing system in terms of knowing who their government was, the chain of command, and also who had the power, and teaching people that the politicians are there for us and that we as the people have the power. And it continues, the challenges continue in terms of educating people, the power that they have, number one, and also to balance growing food in cities with the need for affordable, and I say that word, affordable housing.
I guess that's a good segue to you, Jaime.
Well, I wasn't inspired by the three of them. But when I took office as a mayor in my city, our ratio of green areas per inhabitant was a half square meter of green area per inhabitant. So we started with some public parks. All of a sudden, we realized that it would take a lot of money, and it would take 20, 25 years until the trees grow up, and nothing could happen in the meantime. So the people I started to learn with people. So they showed me, why you're spending such amount of money in building parks? Why not saving existing parks, existing woods? Mm-hmm. Oh, that's why. And we started because the families that they have some woods, existing woods, they were paying taxes, and it was not. So I realized one thing. I went to a family, let's say your family. So you have an area of 100,000 square meters. So I proposed a deal. During years and years, your family, you took care of this wood. Okay, you won't pay taxes anymore, and we're going to buy 2/3 of your area, and you're going to keep 1/3 of your remaining area. But we're going to pay homage to your family, giving the name of the park, and we're going to buy the 2/3. But you have to sell us for a small amount of money. Because having a public park having a public park in the area, your land will grow up the price. So it's a win-win solution. And we started agreements, and in a few years we have not a half square meter, but 60 square meter per inhabitant. 98% of the agreements, they were agreements. And the city is now the greenest city in the country. But it's not enough. We started to build to how can you provide a park for people? You have to be very simple, because most of the municipalities, they are wasting a lot of money building walls around the park. I told them, why why not having cycleways to define the area, and you don't have to build gates and
Right.
to protect the area. The people will protect the area. So I realized one thing. A park, you never finish. You start
And you keep going, right?
and keep them. And it's incredible how committed the population of my city, they are with our green areas. Because in some of them, they were once made in nature. For instance, quarries.
Right.
So it's a want made in nature. But at the same time, during years and years, this quarry transformed in another landscape.
Right.
We took advantage of this landscape, and we made some public facilities. For instance, the free University for Environment, or a theater. Everything, or an existing landfill we transformed in a park. We changed, and it's incredible how you can do it and fast.
So
I have
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to pick up on that point that you asked, but
Okay.
Go ahead. You want to finish your thought, and then I want to pick up on something that you just said because it connects to something that Karen said earlier. Okay, I'll just switch to Karen. You were talking about the walls, and you're concerned about the kind of parks with walls. Karen, could you talk about what you were telling me earlier about the urban gardens and the safety and observation in terms of the gardens and the walls?
So in New York City, we have over 600 community gardens, again, mostly in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhood of color. And most of them are surrounded by chain link fences. And the reason is because of garden protection of the neighborhood. Because at one time, like I said, no one wanted to come into our neighborhoods. And so the gardens are fenced off. However, the policy is an open door policy. And I say that because whenever you do provide fencing and you don't open the doors to the public or the community, they don't own it. And so what you see is an increase in vandalism. So people ask me, do people come in and steal from your garden? And I say no, they don't do that because the doors to our garden are open. And as a result, the community at large feels ownership. When people walk past our garden, we encourage them to come in. It's part of what is called a community garden. It's not an own garden, it's a community garden. So if you have those doors open, regardless if it's a park, a garden, a playground, those doors have to be open to encourage people to come in and feel ownership. Once they feel ownership, they're empowered to protect it. So it's not the two-legged people that come in and take over and steal the fruits. It's more the animal friends that come take it.
Well, so Roger, could you pick up on that too? Because you're working in areas where this is also kind of an issue, and safety and vulnerability. How do you address that?
Well, I take the same approach. We have fences on our properties because our properties are city-owned, and we have to protect them that way. But as with all of our farms and all of our projects, they're completely open to the public. The reason why is because the same thing as Karen mentioned, is that you have to have community buy-in and community engagement in the projects that you have in their neighborhood. If not, then they're going to look at it as something where even I myself, who is a minority coming in, they're looking at me as an outsider coming in and instilling something into their community for them. So the idea is to go out and reach out to the community, do community needs assessments, figure out what the community needs in terms of what you're willing to offer, and then start implementing that with the help of the community. Vandalism, yes, there's kids, they come, they play, they do whatever, and they vandalize. There's people who come and they steal stuff and they do whatever. But for me, we're growing food for the community. So however you feel you have to take it, take it. That's why I'm growing it. If you want to come pay for it and give a donation, do that as well. If you want to come support the farmers markets or you want to buy a CSA share, do all of that. But whatever it is, our goal is to teach people how to have responsibility for land and for the food that they eat. So however they're willing to engage themselves and connect with that, be it stealing or whatever way we're willing to support that and then engage them and bring them into the community and the project as a whole.
Well, now, Jaime raised an interesting point about the idea of the forest, where a person essentially gets a tax rebate because they do care for it. Has anything, could you, and Meg, were you thinking of anyone along the underline in terms of managing the property of the underline that is adjacent to their property?
It's interesting because you have roads that separate the owners from the property, and so for them to get a sense of ownership, you have to get them to the space.
Right.
And you can't get them to the space unless you create a place. And so we have a few challenges. You know, you said don't put a gate up. Everybody wants a gate, they want a wall, they want a fence, you know. I'm gonna walk on this because we have 100 feet. And so they say, oh, but what about security? Aren't you gonna put cameras up at night? And aren't you gonna have patrols? And what about the homeless population? And you know, there's sort of an old adage in the trail world, the more people you have using it and the more eyes you have on the trail, the better your security. So our goal is to get people to the space. Our goal is to get people to take ownership of something that is really sort of throwaway land. And so we have to do lots of things in terms of activation, which are garden spaces, particularly in that Coconut Grove area. You know, there's neighborhoods right across the street, so that's sort of ideal. And your students at UM envision that as well. We're right across the street from UM. You know, so if we can get students to own a parcel and take ownership of it, that's a way for people to claim it. And activate it, and then keep it maintained ongoing.
So when you think about how people claim space, to come back a minute to the gardens where they're community gardens, how are people vested? Do they actually get a quadrant in the gardens that you started, Karen?
So when we started back in the late 70s, it was called Guerrilla Garden. We just went in and started taking over. Now, because, you know, it's city-owned, there are leasing agreements in place, so we can lease a vacant lot as long as it's not dedicated for immediate housing. You have 10 people in your neighborhood that want to sign up, the city will give you a 4-year lease. Now, that leasing is just as good as the present administration. Throughout the country, we're still trying to make sure that community gardens and urban farmers are preserved. There's difference between leasing and preservation, and so we will continue to move forward to make sure that our green spaces throughout the country are preserved and recognized as green spaces.
And Jaime, did you have urban like community gardens where people could grow food, edible gardens as part of your plan?
Well, we started with an idea in our housing program. Public housing. First of all, we never developed programs of housing outside the city. It's inside the path of the city. The second issue is every house had the right to have one tree in front, and they can choose the kind of trees they'll have in the backyard, and also to plant there for their consume. So it was not just a housing program.
I see.
And at the same time, during many, many years, we made a big campaign. We planted 1 million of trees. The problem is you don't have the seeds enough. So the campaign was, we're going to provide the shade, and you have to provide the water. And it's around 8% we lost, but
8%.
Eight.
8. Well, that's pretty
but
good.
1 million of trees.
Wow.
So, you know, it's the sensation of walking in my city, and I know what kind of trees or I helped to plant.
Right.
So, it's, I would say, more and more we have to work with self-subsistence. I gave you an example of my parents. They came from Europe, and we lived in a small plot of 10 meters per 40 meters.
Okay.
And my family, they had a shop in front, and in the backyard, my family, they planted everything, my parents, everything. So for our food supply. I'm saying that it was an important street. I can tell you that every you can do it in new buildings, and on terraces. It's not difficult. We're working. There are many examples all over the world how to have, but it has to be multiplied.
So theoretically, a family could be completely self-sufficient if they had access to food supplies of their own. And in that regard, was it your website that I saw the chicken coops as well? Yes. Do you want to talk about the animal part of this picture?
In terms of food, I don't know if a family could be completely subsistent. I still always support that families support their local supermarkets as well.
Okay.
But I do believe that a family can support themselves in terms of growing what's available to them locally.
Okay.
So in Florida, we have a growing season here technically from October through May. That's our peak growing season. And in that time, a family can support themselves with all kinds of local greens that they can get at the supermarket or anything you can find in a produce aisle at Whole Foods. Then we shift over to more West Indian crops in the summer times where it's more drier climates and so forth like that. In terms of the animals, we include that because we have, for instance, a chicken tractor which serves to help us cultivate the land versus turning the soil.
So could you explain about the chicken tractor? Because it kind of sounds like chickens are pulling a tractor.
Well, no. It's pretty much chickens, and we encage them in the nighttime or during the day, and then we move the tractor around. The chicken then pretty much forages in the ground for bugs or whatever, and that helps to turn the soil.
Okay.
The idea is that you shouldn't hoe your soil because that's disturbing all the nutrients and the elements in your soil, so you're supposed to...
It's a natural form.
Yeah, you're supposed to culture it or nurture it. Anyway, the animals also, so we're teaching about chickens where people could also raise eggs and they can also have bees. I saw a young man, he wanted something on bees. We're also teaching about bees, and because whenever you plant a farm or any kind of urban garden, you have to have support for bees and butterflies and local pollinators. So a lot of the projects that Urban Greenworks has, we're incorporating native elements and native habitat trees, which we have the Florida Everglades here. So we have 4 different distinct ecosystems to South Florida. So in any community in South Florida, you could mimic an edible garden or food forest with and incorporate a native habitat to it. So we look to incorporate all of those elements into the project so that way a person can see the holistic aspect of what farming is and what land and food means to them. It's not just about planting vegetables in a box. It's not just about planting a couple of trees. It's about the entire aspect of it. How does a tree help in terms of creating a canopy and creating shade and reducing heat island effect on your community, thus reducing asthma problems that a lot of kids are facing in inner city communities because there's not a lot of trees, there's a lot of pavement, a lot of pollution that's filtering around and filtering through, creating congestion and lung congestion through health problems. How do growing food? One person can't grow food, a community has to grow food. So that's what we try to teach. You have to grow food, you have to look at the community as the farm. So there's communities in Switzerland, I believe, Europe, that uses this, it's called foodscaping. And it's where each community and each resident in the community comes together and they discuss what they're going to grow in that community for that season, and then they share it. So rather than having 1 or 2 gardens in a community, you have then an entire block or square footage area of community. You have 5 acres of community farming. So we're looking to engage residents to show them all of the different aspects. We're also doing aquaponics. We have an aquaponics program that we work with Northwestern and FIU at one of the high schools here in Liberty City. And it's teaching folks how to grow food and grow fish at the same time while using all these methods and then supporting it with the urban farming. One of the things we do is that if you clean the aquaponic system or the hydroponic system, use that biological medium from the fish that they excrete and add that to your garden, which helps to add nutrients to your plants and thus build up the strengths of your plants. So the idea is to connect folks with the food and also to show them how this food affects their body. We're all one system in essence. So you cannot address public health or anything that we're looking at in terms of food as just a singularity. You have to look at all the different aspects of a community and an individual that makes them healthy.
Well, so that is actually segueing into a conversation that Karen and I were having earlier about the juxtaposition of the garden as also a means of making a living. Do you want to talk a little bit about the new the community kitchen initiative that we were?
Yeah, but first I wouldn't just sort of veggie back, as a friend of mine would say, on this discussion about sustainability, because we cannot grow food in urban areas for everybody. There has to be a partnership with both urban and rural. And the main problem is hunger and poverty, folks. Let's face it. And so how do we deal with that? It's not only about growing food, but job creation, we talked about, and economic development. If you want people to really sort of stem the tide of hunger and poverty, then it's not only about growing food, but giving them a job. Giving them a job so that they can then buy the food that is nourishing for them. They can pay for housing. They can send their children to school. And so we have to look at the intention of urban agriculture and agriculture as a whole. And it has to include not only the ability of growing food, but making a profit so that you can have a job. And no one talks about that, especially in low-income neighborhoods. No one talks about the viability of having job creations. They will talk about more enabling programs, and don't get me wrong, and don't get me started about having more soup kitchens and more food pantries and SNAP. That's all well and good, but no one comes into my neighborhood talking about job creation. And we need to have that economic development. To power people, to empower people, is that they have to own something. When you own something, call it your own it land, own a business, it means something. It gives you power to go and buy organic food, buy decent housing, send your children to decent school. So when we talk about food, we cannot leave out the economics about making a system that's whole, and also for me to help eradicate hunger and poverty. And I'm going to say that because people use the term food deserts. I don't want y'all to use the term food desert, because in my neighborhood, we never heard food deserts before. Because when you say that term food desert, and I know the intention is for statistics, when you use that term food desert, you don't get at the heart of the problem, which is hunger and poverty. What's more terrific? Hunger or poverty or food deserts? So talk about, be intentional about what you say, the words that you use. Food deserts is okay if you want to put it up on a board and talk about that, but when you talk to the people that mean it the most in our community, talk about hunger and poverty.
So do you want, one of the things that we were discussing too was how, in fact, people who have an urban garden, like they might grow something in a community garden, but they can't make it into preserves and sell it because you're not allowed to sell things in commercial markets unless you use a commercial kitchen. So one of the ideas that was discussed was the possibility of building community kind of kitchens that not only do kind of nutrition and education, but also provide a possibility for people to have businesses that they could sell. So, and you're doing something like that, aren't you?
There's always an economic aspect to anything that we do, especially when it comes to creating and developing community. Mm-hmm. My thing in the work that I do is a respect thing. You look at these communities, I too believe that this food desert is not a thing. It's like I put it under a label and under a quotation mark because I think it's just another number or another name that's meant to get funding towards somewhere. Anyway, however, the aspect of empowering an individual and a community to be healthy, it goes beyond just the bare food and the idea of what it means. We have to change how people address food. There's so many products. We talked about what are the obstacles. The obstacles are capitalism. I mean, everyone watches on TV and sees on TV all these food products that are sent out by all these large corporations. We see Monsanto's, we see large farms that are subsidized by the government that tell you that urban farming isn't doable and it's not feasible. And then we talk about how to make a community better. Oh, we need to increase jobs, we need to increase job training, we need to increase all of this. The way to make a community better is to actually, all the services that are meant to make that community a community, fix them. For years, public health has had a perspective where you fix the individual and then you fix the community. That's backwards. It's changing now. The things that you have to fix is you have to fix those parts of the community that are meant to fix the community. If you have an organization that is an after-school program, it has to do its job. If you have a hospital that is meant to treat the sick, it has to do its job. If you have food banks, they have to do their jobs. People cannot be put in a place, and that's what's been the situation for a lot of not-for-profits that work in inner-city communities. We work to perpetuate our jobs, and that's what you can't do. One of the things people don't like about what I do is that I'm always changing, always adapting. You always have to change and adapt to what the community is telling you that they need. Sometimes people don't come to something you do. That means they don't like it, so change it. Go back, ask them what's wrong, what's not working for you, what can I do better? But until you start changing the causal factors and the causal problems of a community's ills, stop blaming the community for the problems. The people aren't the ones who are there helping themselves. It's people like you and I. We get jobs, we get lawyers. We're meant to represent them. We're meant to show them how to escape the ills of the criminal system and the ills of healthcare disparity, and we don't do it. You know, we always look to make sure we have a job next year. If you want to fix a community, make sure you don't have a job next year. And then you knew you did your job, and then you knew that community is getting better. And that's how you start making a change in the community. Show them that you care about what it is that their community involves, engage them in it, and get them to make that change with you. Don't make it for themselves. A lot of time we've been hand-holding communities in need like they're babies. Stop doing that. It doesn't work.
So you've gotten a real range of perspectives, and I think that you might have noticed, I didn't read people's bios to you because I figured you read them yourselves. So you may have questions that come from their bio about things that we haven't discussed, and you're welcome to do that. There are microphones around the room, so we're going to open it up to questions right now. Yes, right here. Wait for the microphone. And then what we'll do is get the next questioner lined up.
Hi, my name is Reed Admire. I'm a student at the Clinton School of Public Service. My question is for both of you guys talking about job creation. I've taken part in starting a community garden at a local park. And on a 100 by 100 plot, we harvested in one season 9,000 pounds of food, donated to a food bank, not creating jobs. What I'm curious about is closing the food loop, waste management. I've seen different cooperative models where they're employing people to go out and collect food scraps, nitrogen, carbon, put it together, making compost and selling soil as a product, or using it for anaerobic digestion to make methane. And this is on a larger level, but I want to know, you're talking about the canopies and the trees and the layers. Are you focusing on the other aspect, the dirt from the bottom up?
So you have two questions, one about the economic loop and the other about the environmental loop?
I think mostly just, my main question would be, are you considering, where does soil creation fall in?
Okay.
Well, it all starts with the soil. My business partner, James Gilo, was in that documentary Dirt, that's the skin of the earth, whatever. So yes, there's 18 inches of soil that sustains our life here on earth. So for us, part of it is about the soil, and that's why it's about connecting people to the land. In my community that I serve, and in a lot of the communities that call me in and ask me to help them out with a project, I never try to go in and fix a problem. Someone tries to come in and they ask me for help, and I try to coordinate the problem around that. One of the things that we see is that folks don't understand they understand gardening, sorry. They have a basic innate understanding of gardening, but there's also a physical, social stigma that they don't want to get back to it. There's the sharecropping mentality, there's the times of flavor, and it's not just black people, it's people of culture, they've been of ethnic origins, they've had this innate, connection to the earth, and for years they've been abused by it, and it's been taken away from them. So now they really don't have a connection to it anymore. They don't want to be connected to it for some reason, even though it's there. So one of the things I face in the communities that I have is that, oh, well, there's all these gardens, but people just see it as farming or sharecropping or something like that. So you have to start with the basics and show them how important the soil is and what it means to them from a physical level. I normally do it with children, and I reach out to children and I show them what the essence is of soil. It's all connections to us. But when it comes down to it, what you have to do in terms of your programming and your soil and all the programs you want to do is you have to figure out the community that you're working in. What is it that your community is looking for? There's always jobs that can be created, and especially if you're an organization that is looking to create job empowerment and you're looking to train folks, you have to have an outlet. If you're going to create a job, you're going to create a soil, and you're going to create a farmer's market or a CSA, who's going to use it at the end of the day? You can have people who you're going to say, okay, here's an opportunity, but when it comes down to it, is there somewhere where they're going to make an income from? Is that soil going to be sold? Is that produce that you're giving away? Is someone going to come and buy it? Be it at whatever cost you're selling it at so you can turn a profit. So you have to look at it as a business, and not-for-profits have to start changing around that mentality of looking at themselves as a not-for-profit, always looking for funding or handout or donation, and figure out how to take their plans and their models and make them actually economically viable. Once we do that, then you can actually reach out to the people that you're helping and be like, all right, now I have this economically viable model, here's how it can help you, or here's how you can use it to help yourself. But if not, then you're just, like I said, you're just spinning a wheel. You know?
I know there'll be another question for Karen coming up, so I'm gonna go to who was it that had the question over here? Yes.
Hi, my name is Maddie Salzman, and I'm actually also a student at the Clinton School. Thank you all for coming and speaking to us. It's really great. So my question's really about whether green spaces, whether they're gardens or for agriculture or just in general, usually come from this place of wanting to improve communities in some way and making them better and more livable for the people there. But a problem I often see confronted in cities is that it ends up pricing the people who live in these places out. And it ends up not really helping the people who are living there, but it ends up helping the people who end up moving in, who are wealthier and able to afford places. So how do we balance those things, either from a policy perspective or from a community one?
So I'm going to direct that to Karen because we just had this conversation. So
It's called gentrification, say what it is. And what people have to understand is, first of all, people have to understand when they move into new communities, the history behind it, the fact that the people have been there for so many years, and that young people, it's mostly young people, mostly young white people that come into the community and are able to come in and afford higher rents, but don't understand the community at large in terms of the history behind that community. And I say to people that are coming from the outside into communities, you got to understand the economics and the fabrics of those communities and have a talk about that. Because what happens is that you come into these communities where people for so long have really got together to uplift the community, and then you're giving rent. And you don't understand the equity when it comes to rent. So, for instance, if a 3-bedroom costs a regular person $1,500, but the landlord is able to give it to you for $2,000, you figure that's a bargain. And what happens is that all of a sudden that price goes up. The family that's been there for 20, 30 years can no longer pay for that rent, and they're displaced. So you people need to come in and find out exactly what is the dynamics around that community, what's the economics around that community, what's the rents around that community, and have that conversation. Because you're the ones that can change that dynamics of gentrification. You're the ones that can say, wait a second, we're not going to come in and pay those prices so that people have been here for so long are displaced. That takes courage. That takes courage amongst people that are coming in the community to sit down with a dialogue and find out what is going on. And making that statement and standing behind and says, we're not going to pay high-raised rents so that we see people displaced. Courage, courage, courage. And then we have to have that sort of dialogue. And what's happening is that people don't have that dialogue. When you see people leaving communities, that should be a red flag that something needs to be done and there needs to be some sort of dialogue.
You can have like 30 seconds, and because then I want to be able to get one more question.
Just a quick point on that also. Minorities can create gentrification, all right? Like, I came from Brooklyn to South Florida, and I lived in Liberty City for 10 years. But one of the things I realized is no matter how much good I want to do, I also have to be cognizant of the fact that I myself am an impetus for gentrification into community. I'm the one who, as an who looked at as an upperly social minority, encourages other people to come to that neighborhood because it's not safe for them to come in there. So even with the programs that I create in an inner city neighborhood, I also try to make sure that I am not creating a program and putting it there. You can't put something there. You could only put an idea or model for someone to follow if they choose to follow it. If they don't, and that's how you could change, that's how you gentrify a community. Most of the green spaces that we see being developed is because to increase development possibilities and make sure that those areas are viable for future development and so forth. So that's what we do. Mm-hmm. So we do create gentrification. But if you're truly engaged in a community, get the community to implement anything before you do. And then that has an impact on if that community is going to truly be gentrified or not.
We have time for one last question. Okay, blue shirt. I'm sorry, you're not a blue shirt. You should say your name.
Hi, I'm Joanne. So hearing you guys speak, there seems to be this huge body of knowledge that people in the cities do not necessarily grow up with, how to preserve food, how to grow food, how to tend to the soil. So my question is actually, you guys have been doing this for a very long time. Do you guys see that when you teach those skills to the people, do they circulate kind of the community, in the community amongst other people, like a neighbor teaching a neighbor, a mother teaching her daughter? Or do you more so see that there is always going to be a space for a specific educator to come in and kind of maintain that education for people of the newer generations becoming responsible for their community green spaces?
Okay, you have to do a 15-second answer.
Yes, there is. There's space for anyone to come in and show change because although residents come and they do teach each other, that's one of the things I encourage. If you come, you get something from us, you get a seed or whatever, and you grow it, share it with your neighbor or whatever, so on. But yes, there's always room for change. There's always room for young people like yourself who are energetic and ideal to come in. Idealism is a good thing. You know, it'll get soured later on, but it's a good thing initially.
No, I don't think it will because you'll be inspired by people like you your whole life. You want to add something, Karen? Okay,
Yeah,
you've got like
I'm
10
going for a few seconds. First of all, I sort of disagree. The thing is that a lot of communities like mine, we don't need help. We don't need people to come in with the savior mentality. We need people to come in with their resources to work beside us. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, when you work beside us, it's golden. Also, when you look at the rich history of our elders, the elders have a rich history around gardening, and also your young people have a rich history around innovative and creative ideas. So how can the two merge and make the agricultural system better?
Okay, thank you. So now here's where we're going to transition. First of all, I want to thank each of you because Jaime Lerner is a rock star in the world of city transformation. Meg is going to be when the transformation of the Miami happens. Karen already is with Urban Gardens. And Roger's going to totally transform northwestern Miami, and we're going to try to be partners in that in the way that Karen describes. What I would like to leave with you are two things before we break into the discussions. And one is to think about how each of the stories were really one person. When they started out, there wasn't, Jaime was a mayor, but he was still one person. Karen, one individual with an idea, with a previous career that wasn't gardening, right? And she can tell you that when she's at your table. And Meg described her story for you and Roger as well. So I think the idea that one person can be empowered to make tremendous change is very important. The second is the research that I do on health in the built environment. On Thursday, I was at a conference in Princeton. We were talking about our work on the implications of health. And it's one of the things we didn't really get at, but maybe you could speak more with the students when we get to the tables. There's not just the health in eating the kinds of foods that you're talking about that are pesticide-free and organic, but the fact is we know the impact of greenery on human health in terms of lower disease rates. So if you think about what this session is about, this is about individual health, population health, and planetary health, and it's something that a person can actually start to do by themselves. So I think this is an incredibly empowering concept. And our thought is that when we sit at the table discussions, you'll be able to start to address some of these issues together. We're going to go around to the tables and chat with you. And our thought is that you might take a topic that was raised that your table would like to know a little bit more about. And we'll get started. I love, you know what, that's the best timekeeper I've ever had. And I think we should use this in our classrooms, don't you? Faculty are speaking, class is over. Okay. So we're going to circulate around to the tables, and you can begin to start discussions. If you all could take down some notes as you go to the tables and interact, if you have like a key point, then we're going to do a roundup at the end where you say one of the most inspiring things you heard at one of the tables, okay?
Wait, us to take notes?
Or just, if you can remember, just but to listen, stop in, chat with them. We have like 8 minutes to do this.
8 minutes, okay.
8 minutes.
8 minutes,
8
okay.
minutes, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, there are about 5 minutes remaining. Please prepare to your report. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes remaining before we report. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage our moderator and our panelists for the final exit discussion.
Okay, so it's really hard to stop your discussions, but I need the panelists to come back from the tables. So if you have a panelist at your table, could you pull out the chair and send them back up? Roger, are you somewhere there? If I could get the panelists back up. Karen, are you somewhere? Okay, so we're almost at the end of our panel. I have to tell you, I love your enthusiasm. You don't want to stop talking to each other, but you really have to. Okay, so ladies, gentlemen, if you were in my class, I would have memorized your name as Andre and Catherine, and I would have said, okay, it's time for you to stop. What we're going to do is just take a couple minutes, and then you can talk to each other a lot more, because I do feel there's some great ideas that came from these tables. If you could tell us one thing, like for 2 seconds, that came from each table that you were inspired by or you felt was important to bring to the group. Jaime, we'll start with you.
Yes, one was the waste of food.
Okay.
The second is how to having the community committed
Yeah.
to public areas or the involvement of community, the communication, how to design ways to make people more
To encourage
committed.
that. Yeah, the framework of design that could do that. Okay. Architects in the room, take note. Karen?
I think the common denominator of the 3 tables that I visited was how to change things. And I think that people have to understand, first of all, is that change comes with you, with power.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no quick fix sort of solution that I can give. But the thing is that you have to recognize that you do have the power. Go and seek. Understand what the issue is, and then go and find the answers.
Okay.
So I sat at one table because I had so much fun. Education. What I heard about was the need to educate your colleagues, your friends, other students about great ideas, about sustainability, and how do you do that in really meaningful, tactical ways? Like, how do you make it relevant and actionable, and then help move the idea forward as it grows?
All of my tables had something similar with water.
Water.
And maintaining the need for water in their countries. I found that very interesting, all you folks who wanted to find different sources of water, to have water where lands aren't, to reforest land so they can have water. Very good. One thing from my experience working with folks in different countries, reach out to the people in the community. Sit down with them when you're planning your project. Don't plan it alone. There was one project that was having a discussion about something in DC. Very good topic in terms of getting food production out in DC and making sure that neighborhoods in need to get food. Make sure that when you go to DC, do a community needs assessment, right? Have the community understand where you're coming from and engage them first. Don't go in there with a solution to a problem that you think they need to fix, and because you see it, you think it wants to be fixed. Go in there and find out how you could do, what is the backbone behind the food need? Because sometimes it's something different, like Karen said, it could be housing, it could be anything. So find out what the issue is and then work on that with the community in terms of fixing the problem. And someone mentioned something about getting food out into a corner store. That was a very good idea. We have a project like that where we subsidize corner stores through food that we grow on a farm. If you have a corner store initiative and you want to get food into communities where food, sometimes the idea is that the corner store owner doesn't want to put out the extra expenditure because he doesn't make his profit back on the returns. So we've tried to subsidize corner stores by growing food and just giving it to them. I think someone mentioned that back there from the Midwest. Very good idea. Keep working at it and figure out if it doesn't work, tweak it a little and find the things that work in what you have. Remember, you already have the concept. Just work at the concept and always change it. Don't ever think of it as a failure. Your failure is something, it's just another opportunity to succeed.
It's waiting to succeed, right?
Exactly. So.
Well, I think that the table that I went to a couple of tables, and they were very taken by this concern that you raised about jobs and the neighborhoods and the notion of how you deal with issues of gentrification and the kinds of policies that might be involved. And the other thing that was raised that I thought was a really interesting point came from our two UVA people who talked about the academic village, the academical village, Jefferson's, and how that works when faculty are living there with students, and how that might be a concept that's exported to neighborhoods where if you're going to work there, you're living there, and you're part of that neighborhood. And so that embeddedness, I think, gets at some of the points that you all were raising. I think it was a wonderful session to much inspiration, and as I was telling one of the tables, what I really loved about this session is that what you see is that it just takes you and your ideas and your passion, your relationships with people to make amazing things happen. This is not a session that requires high technology or huge capital investment. It really just requires motivation on the part of the person to do it. And then one of the students was talking about how impressed she was with your idea, Roger, that what we should really do in nonprofit work is plan ourselves out of a job. And I'm personally going to be thinking about that one. So I want to thank you all very much for being with us today, and I'd love you to give the panelists a warm thank you for the afternoon.